Welcome to Global Power Shifts, Geopolitics and Predictions. Here we look past the headlines to the structures that actually move power: geography, demography, technology, money and ideas. Each episode takes one conflict, one country or one technology and turns it into clear, bounded forecasts: what is more likely than not, by when, and under what conditions. Today we're looking at Russia-China 2035, partnership or imbalance. Let's get started. Today Russia and China look closer than ever: joint military exercises, record energy deals, and talk of a new Eurasian axis. By 2035, though, China's economy and military could outweigh Russia's by a huge margin. So is there a durable partnership or a managed dependency that becomes more unstable over time? In this first episode of Global Power, I'll use three tools: CPP, Battlesphere, and Vectorgame to look under the headlines and ask what this relationship really looks like in 2035 and why it matters for the rest of the world. Segment 1, the three tools of global power. Before we talk about Russia and China, I want to show you the three analytical tools this channel will use in almost every episode. First is CPP. CPP is a framework for understanding where leaders and systems get their sense of power and meaning from, and how that shapes their choices. It starts with a continuum. On one end, power comes mostly from inside: personal conviction, skills, and self-validation. On the other, power comes mostly from outside: institutions, rank, and formal authority. Overlaying that, CPP looks at how much an actor prioritizes self versus others. At the extremes, egoism peaks: leaders who will sacrifice almost anything, including their own people, to protect their position or vision. In the middle, altruism peaks: more willingness to balance their own goals against costs to others and to the system. So when I say I'm doing a CPP read on Russia or China, I'm asking, do their leaders and institutions draw power more from inner conviction or from structures, and how far are they willing to go at others' expense to protect that power? The second tool is the Battlesphere. Instead of treating power as a single number, Battlesphere looks across multiple dimensions at once: land forces and territory, sea power and control of sea lanes, airspace and long-range strike, cyber and information space, economic and industrial capacity. In each sphere we look at vectors: who has momentum, who is dependent, and where actions line up constructively or collide destructively. When I say we're doing a Battlesphere pass on Russia-China, I'm checking how their strengths and weaknesses line up across those spheres and how that shapes the partnership. The third tool is Vectorgame. Rather than pretend we can predict one exact future, Vectorgame focuses on a few key vectors, directions of change, and builds several plausible futures from them. These vectors might be things like sanctions tightening or loosening, China's growth speeding up or slowing down, pressure in Central Asia rising or falling, or the level of confrontation between China and the United States. We then combine those vectors into 3 or 4 scenarios that show different ways the same relationship could evolve by, say, 2035. On this channel, when I say we're running Vectorgame, it means we're asking, if these forces keep pulling in these directions, what kinds of futures become more or less likely? With those tools in mind, let's turn them on the Russia-China partnership. Segment 2, Russia-China through CPP. Using CPP, we start with where power comes from and what costs leaders will accept. Russia's leadership today draws power heavily from institutions and control: the security services, the presidency, and a tightly managed elite. Power is tied to the state and to the survival of the current regime that sits toward the external institutional side of CPP, with high egoism, willingness to sacrifice others, including citizens and soldiers, to preserve that system. China's leadership also leans heavily on institutions: the party, the state, and a long-term national project, but wraps that in a narrative of collective rise and stability. That still sits on the institutional side, but with a different mix of self-protection and group framing. In practical terms, CPP suggests both systems are highly protective of their power cores and suspicious of anything that threatens internal control. Both are willing to accept high external costs to neighbors, partners, and sometimes their own populations to protect those cores. Neither is naturally inclined to share control inside the partnership. Each prefers arrangements that reinforce its own core. That CPP profile already hints at friction: 2 systems that both prefer to dominate their environment, and that both are comfortable imposing costs on others, even allies, when their cores feel threatened. Segment 3, Battlesphere, multi-domain balance. Now let's scan the Battlesphere. Land sphere. Russia still has large ground forces and deep experience in land war. China's land focus is more regional, but modernization continues. Here, Russia remains relevant as a source of doctrine, hardware, and hard lessons, but the cost of that experience has been enormous. Sea sphere. Russia's navy is limited as a true blue water force, with some leverage in the Arctic and near its coasts. China is rapidly building one of the world's largest navies, with growing ability to project power from the first island chain into the Indian Ocean. At sea, the balance inside the partnership leans heavily toward Beijing. Airspace and long-range strike. Russia retains advanced air defenses and missile systems. China is building dense satellite constellations, surveillance networks, and long-range precision capabilities. Together they complicate Western planning, but the industrial scaling potential again favors China. Cyber and information sphere. Both states have offensive cyber and information capabilities. Russia has long practiced in disruption and political warfare. China controls major platforms and data flows. Combined, they can project narratives and pressure far beyond their borders. Economic and industrial sphere. Here the asymmetry is stark. Russia is a major supplier of energy and raw materials, constrained by sanctions and limited diversification. China is a manufacturing and technology giant that can absorb and redirect those inputs at scale. In simple terms, Russia increasingly supplies the fuel, China owns more of the engine. Seen through the battle sphere, this is not a balanced 50-50 partnership. Russia's comparative advantage lies in disruption, geography, and raw materials. China's lies in sustained industrial and technological power. Over time, that gap shapes who sets the terms inside the relationship. Segment 4. Vectorgame. 3-2035 scenarios. Now we run Vectorgame. 3 plausible 2035 scenarios built from key vectors. Let's track 4 main vectors: Western sanctions and pressure, tighter, stable, or easing. China's economic trajectory: solid growth, slowing, or sharp slowdown. Stability in Central Asia and other shared neighborhoods. The level of US-China confrontation. Scenario A: aligned but unequal. Sanctions and Western pressure stay high. China manages slower but positive growth. Central Asia remains mostly stable. US-China tensions persist. In this world, Russia leans ever more heavily on China for markets, tech workarounds, and diplomatic cover. China relies on Russia for discounted energy, some military technology, and a partner willing to take risks. The partnership holds, but the imbalance grows. By 2035, Russia is clearly the junior partner in a tighter Eurasian bloc, trading autonomy for survival. Scenario B: fractured partnership. Here, China slows more sharply. Parts of the West quietly test limited accommodation with Russia. Central Asia becomes more unstable, and both Moscow and Beijing see opportunities and risks there. Russia experiments with more independent moves, diversifying energy customers where it can, selling arms to actors China is wary of. The result is a more brittle, transactional relationship, still aligned in some areas, but with growing mistrust and a higher risk of misunderstandings or competing moves in shared neighborhoods. Scenario C: tightened Eurasian bloc. In this path, US-China confrontation escalates significantly. Sanctions widen. China doubles down on building its own tech and financial systems. Russia accepts clear junior status in exchange for deeper integration. Energy pipelines, rail and port infrastructure, payment systems, and military planning all become more tightly. By 2035, you have something close to a formal Eurasian axis with its own trade routes, finance, and security architecture. Vectorgame doesn't tell us which scenario will definitely happen. It shows how a few key vectors: sanctions, growth, regional stability, and great power rivalry push this relationship toward different futures, all built on the same CPP course and battle sphere balance we saw earlier. Segment 5. Why this matters to the world. So why should anyone outside Moscow and Beijing care about how this partnership evolves? First, energy and commodities. If the relationship hardens into a tight bloc, a large share of oil, gas, and key minerals could move through channels less responsive to Western pressure. That can change price dynamics and supply security for everyone else. Second, conflict risk and geography. A more confident bloc could take greater risks in Europe or the Indo-Pacific, while a fractured bloc might create new flashpoints in Central Asia and other border regions as both sides test their leverage. Third, rules and systems. This relationship shapes voting patterns in international institutions, the spread of surveillance and censorship technologies, and the financial and digital plumbing that underpins global trade and sanctions. In short, the balance inside the Russia-China partnership affects what you pay for energy and goods, where wars are more likely to break out, and which rules govern the systems you live inside. We've just used CTP, battle sphere, and Vectorgame to look at Russia and China not as a single headline, but as a shifting field of power, pressure, and possible futures. On the surface, it's a partnership. Underneath, it may be an unstable imbalance that will shape energy flows, alliances, and conflict risk through 2035. Which scenario do you think we're moving toward right now, and which single vector do you think is most underestimated? Sanctions, China's growth, Central Asia, or US-China confrontation? This has been Global Power Shifts, Geopolitics, and Predictions. If this helped you see the story behind the headlines, consider subscribing for more long-form episodes on politics and power, conflicts and war, and AI and tech geopolitics. Tell me in the comments which country, conflict, or technology you want modeled next, and check back in future episodes to see how today's forecasts hold up. The world isn't getting simpler, but together we can make it more legible. Thank you and see you for our next episode.